This is the part 2 of this story. Please make sure you have watched the part 1 for you to understand. Thanks. Don't also forget to tell us in the comments section the country you are watching from. The cold air outside the mansion hit Joy like a wave, a reminder that the world she was about to step into was as harsh and unforgiving as the life she was leaving behind. The estate loomed behind her, silent and imposing, but as she stepped away from it, her breath seemed to catch in her throat. She had made it this far. She had crossed the threshold, an act that felt both terrifying and exhilarating. The taste of freedom was close, but she knew that the most dangerous part of her journey had just begun. She moved swiftly through the shadows, staying close to the wall that bordered the estate. The night was her ally now. The moon hung low in the sky, casting a pale light that seemed to guide her steps, but also exposing her to anyone who might happen to glance in her direction. She couldn't afford to be seen, not now, not after all the planning, the risks, and the sacrifices she had made. Joy's heart pounded as she crept past the high iron gate. The streets outside the mansion were empty, the houses distant and dark. It was strange. She had lived her whole life in the village, where the streets were full of life, full of chatter and movement. Now, in this unfamiliar place, the silence was suffocating. She felt like a small speck of dust floating in the dark, unseen, unnoticed, alone. But the solitude felt different now. It wasn't just isolation, it was liberation. She was finally free from the walls that had kept her captive. For the first time in weeks, she didn't feel like someone else's possession. She was Joy again, the girl from the village, the girl with dreams, with a future. And nothing, no one, could take that away from her. As she walked, she kept her pace steady, focusing on the road ahead. Her mind raced with the questions she had never allowed herself to ask before. Where would she go? What would she do once she was free? The truth was, she didn't know. But she knew she had to keep moving. She couldn't turn back. Not now. But the quiet was shattered by a sound, a distant rumble, the sound of a vehicle approaching. Panic surged through her, and she darted into the nearest alley, her heart pounding in her chest. She pressed herself against the cold stone of a building, holding her breath, praying that she wouldn't be seen. The sound grew louder, and she dared not look, afraid that if she did, she would be caught in the light of the approaching car. The vehicle passed slowly, its headlights sweeping across the alleyway where Joy stood frozen. The beam of light cut through the darkness, illuminating the space just inches from her face. Her body was tense, every muscle screaming with fear, but she didn't move. She couldn't. If the car saw her, if anyone saw her now, it would all be over. The car's engine hummed in the distance, and then, just as quickly as it had appeared, it was gone. Joy exhaled a shaky breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Her body relaxed, but only slightly. She couldn't let her guard down. Not yet. The city around her felt vast and foreign, like a maze with no clear exit. Every street seemed to lead in a new direction, each corner a potential danger. The lights of the city flickered in the distance, a stark reminder of how far she had come, and how much farther she still had to go. As the night wore on, Joy continued to move, never staying in one place for too long. She kept to the shadows, blending into the night as best as she could. She had no destination in mind, only the need to put as much distance between herself and the mansion as possible. She knew the dangers, knew that Mr. Nwosu would stop at nothing to find her, to bring her back. But she couldn't let that fear control her. She had made her choice, and she would live or die by it. By the time the first light of dawn began to break over the horizon, Joy had made it out of the city and into the countryside. The familiar fields, the open expanse of land, this was the world she knew. This was where she had grown up, where her heart had always longed to be. She paused for a moment to take in the beauty of the landscape. The gentle sway of the tall grass in the wind, the rustling of the trees, it felt like the world was welcoming her back, as if it had never meant for her to leave. But even in the comfort of the familiar, Joy knew she couldn't stay. Not here. Not now. She had to keep moving. There were still people after her, and there was still the weight of the mansion hanging over her head. As she walked further into the wilderness, she stumbled upon a small, remote village, one that she had passed through as a child, but never really noticed. The houses were humble, built with the same warmth and simplicity that had marked her own home. It was a village of farmers, of people who lived off the land and traded with one another, who took care of their own. For the first time since leaving the mansion, Joy allowed herself to stop. She approached the village cautiously, her every sense on alert. The villagers were kind-hearted people, but they were also wary of outsiders. She couldn't risk drawing attention to herself. She had to blend in, remain unnoticed. She found an old woman sitting outside her house, tending to a small garden. The woman looked up as Joy approached, her sharp eyes noting the young girl's tired, worn appearance. Joy's stomach twisted in nervousness, but she forced herself to smile, a smile that, despite its attempts to be friendly, didn't quite reach her eyes. "Good morning, ma'am," Joy said softly, hoping her voice would sound calm, unthreatening. "I'm lost. Can you help me?" The old woman studied her for a moment, as if weighing her words carefully. Joy stood there, waiting, her heart hammering in her chest. After what felt like an eternity, the woman nodded, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "Come inside, child. You look like you could use some rest." It wasn't much, just a small, humble home, but it was a refuge. A safe haven, if only for a short while. Joy stepped inside, her body exhausted, her mind still racing. She had made it out of the mansion, but the journey was far from over. The old woman, kind as she was, could only offer temporary shelter, and Joy knew that she couldn't stay here forever. The longer she stayed, the greater the chance of being found. But for now, in this moment, she allowed herself a brief respite. The old woman's warmth and care were a welcome reprieve from the chaos that had ruled her life for so long. She closed her eyes and let herself rest, knowing that the next phase of her journey was just beginning. The village was quiet, its inhabitants going about their simple routines with a peacefulness that Joy had not felt in a long time. She had only been here for a day, but it already felt like a distant dream compared to the cold, calculated world of the mansion she had escaped. The warm smell of cooking food filled the air, and the laughter of children playing nearby was like music to her ears. For a moment, it felt as though time had slowed down, as if the worries that had haunted her for so long had been left behind. But Joy knew better than to allow herself to become too comfortable. Safety was fleeting, a luxury that couldn't be relied upon for long. Her escape was only a temporary victory, and she had learned from her experience that the world was a dangerous place. She couldn't afford to trust anyone completely, not yet. The old woman who had taken her in, Mama Kemi, had given her food and a place to sleep, but Joy had made it clear that she couldn't stay for long. She couldn't risk being found, not when Mr. Nwosu would undoubtedly be searching for her. The thought of him, of what he would do to her if he caught her, made her blood run cold. It was a fear that was always at the back of her mind, threatening to rise up and consume her. As the days passed, Joy began to help Mama Kemi with the garden, finding solace in the physical labor. The work kept her occupied, kept her from thinking too much about the past and the future. It gave her a sense of purpose, something she hadn't had in so long. For the first time since she had been sold, she felt like she was doing something meaningful, something she could be proud of. But no matter how much she tried to focus on the present, the weight of what she had left behind loomed large. She couldn't forget the family she had left behind in the mansion, the servants who had shown her kindness, the people who had been nothing more than pawns in a game of wealth and power. She thought of her parents, Uzoamako and Chijioke. And the pain of their betrayal still stung. How could they have done this to her? How could they have sold their own daughter? The questions continued to haunt her, even though she knew that dwelling on them would only slow her down. One afternoon, as Joy worked in the garden with Mama Kemi, she heard the unmistakable sound of a vehicle approaching. Her heart froze, and a cold rush of fear flooded her veins. She stood up quickly, her hands trembling as she looked in the direction of the road. The dust rising in the distance told her that it wasn't just a passing traveler, it was a car that was coming this way. Mama Kemi didn't seem to notice Joy's sudden alarm, and for a moment, Joy considered running, but she quickly realized there was nowhere to hide. The road was narrow, and the village was small. There was no way to escape without being seen. She stood still, holding her breath, hoping that the vehicle would pass by without stopping. But of course, fate was not on her side. The car slowed as it approached the entrance to the village, and Joy's worst fears were realized. The vehicle stopped just outside the gate, and a figure stepped out. Joy's heart skipped a beat as she saw the man who emerged from the car. It was one of Mr. Nwosu's associates, a tall man with dark sunglasses and a suit that looked far too expensive for the dusty roads of this village. He looked around for a moment before spotting Joy in the garden, his sharp eyes locking onto her like a predator spotting its prey. Her breath caught in her throat. It was as if the world had slowed down. She could feel her legs turning to stone, her body frozen in place. She wanted to move, to run, but she was paralyzed by fear. This man, this agent of Mr. Nwosu, was here to find her, and he had found her. Well, the man said, his voice low and cold, "We've been looking for you." Joy's mind raced. She had to act fast. She couldn't let herself be caught. She had come so far, endured so much, to be free, and now it was all about to crumble. Mama Kemi, who had been unaware of the looming danger, turned to face the man, a confused look on her face. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice kind, but cautious. The man didn't even acknowledge her. His focus was solely on Joy. "You've been hiding here, haven't you?" he asked, his voice full of disdain. "You think you can just run away and escape? You think we wouldn't find you?" Joy felt the anger rise in her chest. She had never felt so small, so helpless, in all her life. But there was something else there too, something deeper. The fear was still there, yes, but so was something else, something stronger, more determined. This was her fight, her battle, and she wasn't going to give up now. Without thinking, Joy turned and ran. She didn't know where she was going, didn't know what her next step would be, but she couldn't stay here. Not with him, not with the memories of the mansion and everything she had endured flooding back into her mind. She ran with all the strength she had, her feet pounding the ground, her breath coming in short gasps, the sound of the man's voice calling after her fading behind her. The countryside seemed endless, a vast stretch of land with no end in sight. The wind whipped through her hair, her body moving faster than she had ever moved before. She was running not just from the man chasing her, but from everything, her past, her pain, her fear. She was running towards something she couldn't quite name, but it didn't matter. All that mattered was that she was running, and for the first time in weeks, she felt like she was in control again. After what felt like hours, Joy finally slowed, her chest heaving with exhaustion. She found herself standing in the middle of a field, surrounded by tall grasses that swayed in the wind. The man was no longer behind her, but she knew it wouldn't be long before he or someone else would come looking for her. The reality of her situation hit her once again, but she didn't give up. She couldn't. Not after everything she had been through. The moral is that freedom requires constant vigilance and courage. Just because one escapes the prison of their past doesn't mean they are free from the shadows of that past. But the willingness to keep running, to keep fighting, no matter how tiring the journey, is what leads to eventual liberation. Joy had never known exhaustion like this. Her body ached from the endless running, her legs sore and trembling from the strain. Her breath came in sharp, desperate gasps, the air thick with the scent of the earth and the weight of her fear. The countryside had seemed endless when she first fled, but now it felt like a vast expanse of nothingness. The tall grasses, the empty fields, they stretched on, and yet she felt no closer to freedom. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the land, and still, there was no sign of safety. She had run for hours, but now her feet seemed to move of their own accord, dragging her forward even as her mind screamed for her to stop. She was lost in a sea of uncertainty, with nothing to guide her but the will to survive. Her thoughts kept racing back to that moment, when she had seen the man from the mansion, when she had heard him call her name. The realization had hit her like a wave, they were coming for her. Mr. Nwosu would stop at nothing to get her back. And no matter how far she ran, no matter how fast, they would always be behind her, lurking in the shadows, waiting for her to slip up. A cold sweat formed on her brow as she stumbled forward, her body betraying her. Her energy was draining, and every step felt heavier than the last. She needed to stop. She needed rest. But there was no time for that. The sound of footsteps behind her made her freeze in place. For a brief moment, everything went silent, the wind, the distant cries of birds, the rustling of the grasses, all of it disappeared. All she could hear was the pounding of her heart in her chest. She quickly turned her head, her eyes scanning the distance, but there was nothing. No figure in sight. No sign of anyone chasing her. But the sound, it was real. She could hear it clearly, the soft crunch of grass underfoot, the slight rustling of leaves. It was closer now, unmistakable. Her instincts screamed at her to run, but her body refused to obey. She was exhausted, and she could feel the weight of her fear threatening to overtake her. She didn't know how long she stood there, paralyzed by the fear of being caught, but the footsteps stopped. She waited, holding her breath, trying to make sense of what was happening. It didn't make sense. She was out of the city, far from the mansion. How could anyone have found her this quickly? Suddenly, a figure emerged from the trees, and for a split second, Joy's heart leaped in her chest. It wasn't the man from the mansion. It wasn't Mr. Nwosu's associate. Instead, it was a stranger, a woman, young and with eyes that held a sense of both caution and curiosity. The woman took a step forward, her movements slow and deliberate. Joy's first instinct was to run, but she didn't. She couldn't. She was too tired, too beaten down to escape again. And besides, the woman didn't look like she was here to harm her. In fact, she seemed to be just as lost as Joy, though in a different way. "Who are you?" Joy asked, her voice hoarse, raw from the shouting and the running. The woman looked at her, then glanced around as if ensuring they weren't being watched. "I'm not here to hurt you," she said, her voice low and steady. "I saw you running. You're not from around here, are you?" Joy shook her head, her eyes narrowing as she tried to make sense of the situation. "No," she replied, her voice trembling, I'm just trying to get away." The woman's eyes softened. "From what?" The question hit Joy like a stone, a harsh reminder of everything she had fled. She hadn't allowed herself to think about the mansion for hours now, not since she'd escaped its iron gates. She had focused only on survival, on putting distance between herself and her past. But now, in this quiet field, it was impossible to escape it. "From everything," she whispered. "From being sold." The woman's face flickered with recognition. She stepped closer, her eyes filled with understanding. "I've been there," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I know what it's like to be owned, to be used. But you don't have to do this alone." Joy looked at her, confused, her heart racing. "Who are you?" The woman hesitated before speaking again. "I'm someone who knows how to disappear. I've been hiding from people like him for years." She paused, her expression darkening. "You're not the first one he's taken, you know." Joy's stomach twisted with the weight of her words. She wanted to ask more, to demand answers, but before she could speak, the woman held up a hand to silence her. "You need to move," she said urgently. "If you stay here too long, you'll be found. Trust me, I know how they work." Joy's heart raced. Was it possible? Could this woman really help her? Was there someone else who had escaped Mr. Nwosu's reach? Before she could respond, the woman grabbed her arm, pulling her toward the trees. Come on. I'll take you somewhere safe, for now. But we have to keep moving. No one can know you're here. No one can know you're alive. Joy didn't resist. She didn't know why, but something in the woman's eyes told her that this was her chance, a chance she couldn't afford to miss. She followed her without another word, her mind racing with questions, but too tired and too desperate for answers to ask them. As they disappeared into the thick brush, the reality of what she had done, what she had started, began to hit her. This wasn't over. It couldn't be. But for the first time since she had run from the mansion, she felt a flicker of hope. She wasn't alone anymore. There were others who understood. There were people who knew what it meant to be trapped, and who knew how to survive. This part of the story highlights the importance of finding solidarity and support during times of struggle. Joy's escape has led her into an uncertain and dangerous world, but she has discovered that she is not alone. There are others who have faced the same hardships, and they can offer guidance and strength. This emphasizes the power of community and shared experiences. Even in the darkest moments, one can find people who understand, who can offer the tools needed to fight for freedom. The lesson here is that freedom is not just a personal journey. It's also about finding the strength to trust others, to ask for help, and to give help when needed. The road to liberation is rarely a solo endeavor. The power of unity, of standing together with those who share your struggles, is a force that cannot be underestimated. The woods seemed to stretch on forever, the dense trees and thick underbrush making it difficult to move quickly. Joy's feet were sore from running, and her body still ached from the exhausting flight from the mansion. But she kept moving, driven by a force she hadn't felt in days, the promise of safety, the possibility of a life beyond the fear and confinement that had marked her existence for so long. The woman who had come to her rescue, whose name was Nneka, moved swiftly through the forest, her movements graceful and confident. She knew the terrain, knew how to stay hidden from prying eyes. Joy followed her closely, her heart still pounding in her chest, but not from fear this time. Now it was the thrill of possibility, the spark of hope she hadn't dared to feel in so long. Nneka glanced over her shoulder at Joy, her expression serious. We need to keep moving. The longer we stay in one place, the more likely it is they'll find us. Trust me, I've seen this before. Joy nodded, trying to quiet the rising panic in her chest. She didn't want to think about Mr. Nwosu and his associates. She didn't want to think about the men who would hunt her down, who would tear apart villages if it meant finding her. She had to focus on the present, on the journey ahead. How did you escape? Joy asked, her voice quiet, still unsure of whether she could trust Nneka completely. They had barely spoken since they had met, and Joy's instincts told her to be cautious. But there was something about Nneka that made her feel like she wasn't alone, like she wasn't fighting this battle in isolation. Nneka glanced at her with a half-smile, a glint of something dark in her eyes. I've been running from people like him for a long time, she said softly, her voice tinged with bitterness. I was once in the same position you were, sold, taken, trapped. But I didn't let them break me. I learned how to survive, how to stay hidden. And now, I help others who are in the same situation. Joy's mind raced. She hadn't expected this. She had assumed Nneka was just another victim, like her, someone with no choice but to endure, to survive. But Nneka's calmness, her sense of purpose, made Joy realize that this was more than just survival. Nneka wasn't just hiding, she was fighting. How can you help me? Joy asked, her voice full of a quiet desperation she hadn't allowed herself to express until now. She needed to know that there was a way out, that this wasn't just an endless run from danger. She needed to believe there was hope. Nneka stopped walking for a moment, turning to face Joy. Her eyes softened, and for the first time, Joy saw the woman not as a stranger, but as an ally. You have to be strong, Joy. Strength is the key. But the kind of strength you need isn't just physical. It's the will to fight for your freedom, to never give in. You can't keep running forever. Eventually, you have to turn and fight back. Joy felt a surge of emotion at Nneka's words. It was the first time anyone had said something like that to her since she had been taken from her home. In the mansion, she had been treated like an object, a thing to be bought and sold, used and discarded. But now, here in the wilderness, Nneka was telling her that she wasn't just a victim. She was a person who could choose to fight, to take control of her life. But how? Joy asked, her voice filled with doubt. How can I fight? I'm just one person. They have everything, power, money, connections. How can I stand up to someone like him? Nneka's expression hardened, her eyes filled with a quiet intensity. You don't need to fight them all at once, she said. You need to fight for yourself. For your future. You take it one step at a time. Find the cracks, find the weak spots in their system, and use them to your advantage. Joy felt a chill run down her spine. It wasn't a comforting thought, but it was a realistic one. The fight wasn't going to be easy. It wasn't going to be a fair fight. But the idea of standing up, of taking control, no matter how small her actions might be, suddenly it didn't seem impossible. They continued walking, and for the first time in a long while, Joy felt like she was making progress. She wasn't just running away anymore. She was moving forward, toward something. She was becoming someone who could take control of her life. She could see the path ahead, and though it was uncertain, it felt like the first step toward reclaiming her freedom. As they walked deeper into the forest, Nneka stopped again, motioning for Joy to be quiet. The tension in the air was palpable as Nneka's eyes scanned the distance. Joy held her breath, straining to hear what had caught Nneka's attention. For a moment, the sounds of the forest seemed to vanish, and the only thing Joy could hear was the pounding of her own heart. Then, from the shadows of the trees, a figure emerged. It was a man. Tall, broad-shouldered, with the same dark sunglasses that Mr. Nwosu's associates wore. He moved slowly, cautiously, his gaze sweeping the area. Joy's stomach clenched with fear. It was one of them. One of Mr. Nwosu's men. Nneka grabbed her arm, pulling her back into the cover of the trees. Stay down, she whispered urgently. Don't move. Don't make a sound. Joy crouched low, her body pressed against the cool earth, trying to keep her breathing steady. The man moved closer, his steps slow and deliberate. For a moment, Joy thought he would find them, that he would spot them hiding in the bushes, but Nneka held her still, her grip tight and reassuring. The man walked past them, his footsteps fading into the distance, and Joy let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Nneka exhaled softly, her body tense but calm. They're closing in on us. We need to move, and we need to move fast. Joy nodded, her mind racing. She had never felt so exposed, so vulnerable. But Nneka was right. The danger was real. And if she wanted to survive, she had to keep moving, to keep fighting, no matter what. The quiet after the near encounter with the man from the mansion felt like a fragile piece. As Nneka led Joy deeper into the forest, the oppressive weight of fear hung heavy in the air. The shadows of the trees seemed to stretch longer as the evening drew near, and the world around them felt impossibly vast and dangerous. Joy's body was exhausted. Her legs were sore from the days of running, and her mind, too, was weary from the constant vigilance. Every sound, every rustle of leaves in the wind, set her heart racing. Every step felt like it could be the one where they were found, where the nightmare would come crashing down. The man had been so close, too close. Had they been too slow? Had they missed a step? But Nneka's presence gave her a sliver of comfort. The woman moved through the forest with ease, her every movement deliberate and controlled, as if she had been doing this for years. Joy followed closely behind, trying to mimic Nneka's calmness, but her thoughts kept spiraling. The risk was so high now, the stakes so much greater than she had ever realized. Nneka stopped abruptly, and Joy nearly collided with her. The older woman raised a hand to silence her, and Joy instinctively stilled, her heart pounding once again. Nneka turned, her eyes scanning the darkening forest around them. After a long moment, she gestured for Joy to follow her, leading them to a small, hidden shelter, a simple lean-to built from branches and covered with moss. It wasn't much, but it was enough to provide some cover, some respite from the world outside. As they settled into the shelter, Nneka spoke, her voice low but firm. "We have to be careful now. They'll be searching for us in every village, every city. We can't stop moving. We need to keep moving through the night." Joy nodded, though a part of her longed for rest, for a moment to simply breathe without the constant weight of fear pressing down on her. She sat down on the ground, her body aching, but she forced herself to remain alert. There would be no peace tonight. Not until they were safe. "You've been running for a long time," Nneka said, as if reading Joy's thoughts. "You must be tired, but I need you to stay focused. The hardest part is ahead." Joy didn't respond at first. The words Nneka spoke weren't comforting, they were a harsh reminder of the journey that lay ahead, of the obstacles yet to come. But they also reminded Joy of something else: she was no longer alone in this fight. Nneka had shared her story, had shown her that she wasn't just an isolated victim of circumstances. There was a way forward, there was hope, and that hope, in its own way, made all the difference. "I'm ready," Joy said finally, her voice steady despite the fatigue creeping into her limbs. "I won't stop. I can't. Not now." Nneka gave her a sharp look, her eyes piercing through the dim light. "You're stronger than you think," she said, almost as if speaking to herself. "But remember, you don't have to fight this alone." The quiet words stirred something inside Joy. She had felt so alone in the mansion, so isolated from the world. But now, surrounded by the wilderness, by the knowledge that Nneka had been through something similar, something that had left her marked but not broken, Joy understood that she wasn't just running to escape, she was running to survive, to reclaim her life. The hours stretched on as they sat in silence, each lost in their thoughts. As the night deepened, the air grew colder, and Joy couldn't help but shiver despite the layers she wore. She pulled her knees closer to her chest, wrapping her arms around them for warmth. At some point, she must have dozed off, because the next thing she knew, Nneka was shaking her gently. The dawn had broken, and the first light of morning filtered through the trees. "We need to keep moving," Nneka said quietly. "The sun is rising, and it's time to leave." Joy nodded and stood slowly, her body protesting the effort. The ache in her muscles was almost unbearable, but she ignored it. She had learned that this was not a time to rest, not a time to give in to her exhaustion. There was too much at stake now. As they moved deeper into the wilderness, Joy's thoughts began to drift back to the mansion, to Mr. Nwosu. She had barely had time to process everything: the betrayal, the violence, the years of being treated like a thing, an object that could be bought and sold. But now, with each step further from the mansion, she began to feel something stirring inside her, something stronger than fear. Anger. Anger at the injustice, at the cruelty that had been done to her and to others like her. "Do you ever think about what you lost?" Joy asked, her voice barely more than a whisper. "Before all of this, before you were running. What did you have?" Nneka's pace didn't falter, but her voice softened. "I had a life. A family. But then I was taken, just like you. It happens to many people. We all lose something, our dignity, our hope, sometimes even our lives, but we can still fight to get it back." The truth of Nneka's words settled heavily in the air between them. The idea of reclaiming everything that had been taken from her, of getting back what she had lost, felt both impossible and necessary. It wasn't just about survival anymore, it was about healing. About finding a way to rebuild her life from the ashes of what had been destroyed. As they moved further through the dense woods, Joy began to feel the sting of the past slowly fade, replaced by a quiet determination. There was so much ahead of her, so many dangers, so many unknowns, but with Nneka's help, she had a chance. A real chance to fight back. Hours passed, and the forest began to thin, giving way to open fields. The landscape was beautiful, serene in a way that almost felt wrong after everything Joy had endured. It was as if the world was offering her peace, a moment of reprieve before the next challenge came. Nneka stopped at the edge of a small river, her eyes scanning the horizon. "We'll rest here for a bit. We're close to the border now. After this, we'll need to be careful, there are more eyes watching the roads." Joy nodded, but as she sat on the bank of the river, looking out at the gentle flow of water, something stirred inside her. She was getting closer, closer to being free. But it wasn't just freedom she was fighting for anymore, it was her life. Her future. And no matter what it cost, she would fight for it. The morning sun broke through the trees, casting dappled light across the forest floor. The river, which had been a quiet, peaceful refuge, now felt like a lifeline, a small pocket of safety in a world that seemed bent on pulling Joy back into the clutches of fear and uncertainty. As she sat by the water, feeling the cool breeze on her face, she reflected on everything that had led her here. How quickly her life had been turned upside down. How her world had shifted from a simple existence in the village to one of constant movement, of running, hiding, and surviving. The life she had known, her family, her friends, the sounds of the market, the smell of the local foods, the laughter of children, felt like a distant memory. In its place was this new life, one full of danger and constant vigilance. Nneka had been right, freedom was not easy. It wasn't just about leaving the mansion behind. It was about finding a way to live again, to reclaim everything that had been taken from her. But it wasn't just about survival anymore. The past few days had awakened something in her, a fire, a desire to fight back, not just for herself but for others, for everyone who had ever been treated as a commodity, for everyone who had been sold and forgotten. Nneka walked up to her, breaking her thoughts. "We need to move again," she said, her voice low but urgent. "We've stayed too long. The longer we're here, the more chance they have of finding us." Joy stood slowly, her body aching with exhaustion, but her mind sharp. Every part of her wanted to stop, to rest, to stay in the moment of peace they had found by the river, but she knew that wasn't an option. There was no time for rest, not until she was free. Nneka led the way, moving with the same grace and precision as before, her eyes scanning every direction, every shadow. Joy followed closely behind, her mind still swirling with the thoughts of the journey ahead. The landscape had changed since they entered the forest, open fields were giving way to more rugged terrain, and the dense woods were thinning. They were approaching the border, the edge of the territory that Mr. Nwosu and his men controlled. "Once we reach the border, things get tricky," Nneka said, breaking the silence. "There are more patrols, more eyes watching. We have to cross at night, and we have to do it without being seen." Joy nodded, the weight of the task settling over her. Crossing the border was not just a physical challenge, it was a symbolic one. It meant leaving behind everything she had known, everything that had defined her existence up until now. It meant truly escaping, truly severing all ties with the life Mr. Nwosu had forced upon her. But it also meant the end of one chapter and the beginning of a new one. She didn't know what the future would hold, but she couldn't keep running forever. As the day wore on, the landscape became more open, the distant hum of human civilization growing closer. The roads were busier now, with the occasional vehicle passing by. Every time one came near, Joy's heart would skip a beat, her body tense with fear that they had been spotted. But Nneka moved with calm precision, guiding her off the road and into the cover of tall grass or behind rocks when they needed to remain hidden. That evening, as the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting the world in a soft, golden glow, they arrived at a small, secluded cabin. It was tucked away in a quiet corner of the countryside, far from the busy roads and the towns. "This is the place," Nneka said, her voice steady. "We'll rest here for the night. Tomorrow, we make our move. The border is just a few hours away." Joy took in the cabin, its simple, rustic design a stark contrast to the cold, imposing mansion she had left behind. Here, there were no walls, no security systems, no men with guns watching her every move. It felt like a place of refuge, like a glimpse into a life that could be hers, a life without fear. They entered the cabin, and Nneka immediately began to prepare a small meal of rice and beans. The simplicity of the food, the basic, earthy smell of the meal, made Joy realize how much she had taken for granted. Back in the mansion, she had eaten meals prepared by servants, fancy dishes that meant nothing, no taste, no warmth. But here, in this tiny cabin, the food felt like sustenance, like it was nourishing her body and her spirit. As they ate, Nneka spoke more about her own journey, how she had been taken years ago, how she had escaped, and how she had learned to survive. Her story was one of hardship and loss, but also of incredible strength and resilience. She had escaped the clutches of a similar man, a man who had sought to control her just as Mr. Nwosu had tried to control Joy. Nneka had fought back, not with weapons or violence, but with wit, with patience, and with the knowledge that freedom was worth any price. "Freedom is never free," Nneka said, her voice quiet but firm. "You have to fight for it. You have to want it more than anything else." Joy listened closely, absorbing every word. Nneka had become not just her ally, but her mentor, guiding her through the hardest moments of her life. She knew that this wasn't over yet. There was still the border to cross, still the men who would come after her. But now, she understood something she hadn't before. Freedom wasn't just about escaping a physical space, it was about reclaiming who you were, about finding the strength to be yourself, no matter what the world tried to take from you. As the night deepened, the moon rising high above, Nneka and Joy sat in silence, watching the stars twinkle above them. For the first time in what felt like forever, Joy allowed herself to relax, to let go of the constant anxiety that had consumed her since her escape. But she knew the peace wouldn't last. Tomorrow, they would leave again, and the road ahead would be even more dangerous than the one they had just crossed. She stood and walked outside, looking out at the land that stretched before her. It was quiet, serene, but the danger was still there, lurking in the distance. She couldn't forget that. She couldn't afford to. But in the stillness of the night, she could feel the weight of the journey she had undertaken. It was her journey, her fight, and she was not going to stop until she was free. End of Part 2. Part 3 coming soon. Please don't forget to tell us in the comments section the country you are watching from. Don't also forget to subscribe to our channel. Thanks.